Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're going to explore 3 stories sent in by people who live deep in the Appalachian forest. Living out there means waking up to some of the most beautiful views in the country. But it also means getting used to the isolation and to the strange things that seem to happen more often than they should. The first story is very real, and unfortunately, way too common in this country. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you, especially for someone like me, who's lived through something similar. The last 2 stories are harder to explain. They don't have clean endings or easy answers, but I keep hearing more and more accounts like these. The final one especially. It's about someone who's not even sure if what they experienced was real, or something their mind created. Personally, I think it was real, but I'll let you decide. As always, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and enjoy the video. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. These days, I live in New York City, but I grew up and spent my entire childhood in West Virginia. Up until the night this story takes place, I loved living there. But after what happened, I could never think of that place as home again. It's been 23 years now, and I can finally look back on that night with a bit of emotional distance. The hardest moments are when I go visit my parents and step back into that house, that room, and that night. I had just turned 13 the week before, and in all my preteen arrogance, I was starting to act out a little, fully convinced I was already old enough to make my own decisions. Our house was in a neighborhood with a few other houses nearby, but right in our backyard was the edge of one of the largest forests in the region. My parents were always really strict about never leaving me home alone. We lived in a place that was relatively quiet, sure, but it wasn't unusual to hear about small break-ins now and then. And the year before, in the neighboring town, a kid had completely vanished. He was only 7, taken from inside his own home, while his parents and grandparents were there. It had been a huge scandal around here, and it only made my parents, and honestly most of the parents in the area, even more cautious. That particular night, we'd had a fight in the afternoon. I can't even remember what started it, but I remember exactly how it ended. Shouting, and my firm decision that I was not going to my mom's work party. I was dead set on it. I remember yelling to the point where my mom, who rarely lost her temper, got really mad. It might have been one of the worst arguments we ever had. They were genuinely hurt, and I remember them walking out and slamming the door behind them without saying a word. They'd planned to be back right after dinner. I, on the other hand, was proud of myself. I finally had the whole house to myself and could do whatever I wanted, at least until they got back. I know I was being totally stubborn, one of those arrogant kids who thinks they know everything. But to be fair, that phase came and went pretty quickly. I mean, most of us go through it at some point. Some more than others, but it's pretty much a universal experience. Since I didn't have a TV in my room, I stayed in the living room. It must have been around 8:30 p.m. when the storm started. Heavy rain, pounding wind. I could hear the trees whipping around out back, and I had to turn the TV up just to hear anything. At about 9:10, the landline rang. It was my parents calling to say there had been a landslide on the main road into town, and traffic was completely blocked. That's when I realized how serious the storm actually was. My mom was speaking louder than usual, maybe because of the rain hammering down on the car. I told them not to worry, that everything was fine. I was still trying to play the part of the angry kid, but my mom's voice, sad, anxious, just erased any leftover anger I had. So I told her I was okay and asked her not to worry. She gave me a list of things to do. Double-check that all the windows and doors were shut tight. unplug a few appliances just in case the storm caused a power surge. Supposedly, my dad had already locked everything before they left, but they wanted me to check anyway. You could hear the storm from downstairs, but once I started going up the stairs, I realized the second floor was way colder, and the sound of the rain and wind was way louder. At first, I thought it was just the master bedroom, which faced the woods and always sounded louder when it rained. But when I got to the top of the stairs, I noticed the bathroom window was wide open. I didn't think much of it, assumed the wind had blown it open. I went over, shut it, and headed back downstairs to wait for my parents. But time kept passing, and nothing happened. Then around 9:45, the phone rang again. My parents wanted to check in. Said the police were trying to clear the road, and with a little luck, they'd be home in an hour. I was about to hang up when I heard the upstairs floor creak. The house wasn't new, and we'd had moisture issues for a while, so certain spots, especially near my room, always creaked when someone stepped on them. I hung up and froze, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. It was a faint sound, barely noticeable, but it was there. The floor was creaking. And then, as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. I told myself it was probably just the wind, or a pressure shift or something. There couldn't be anyone inside. If there were, I'd be hearing more than just faint creaks. I sat back down in the living room, but I was getting more and more anxious. All I wanted was for my parents to get home. There's something I haven't mentioned. I'm diabetic, and I have to check my blood sugar regularly. I've known how to recognize the warning signs since I was a kid. If my levels get too high, I need insulin right away, or I could go into shock. All my medical supplies were on my nightstand, and even though it was the last thing I felt like doing, I knew I had to go upstairs. I started climbing the stairs, and as I got near the top, my whole body tensed up. Parts of the hallway floor were wet, like someone had come inside with soaked shoes and left a trail. That's when it all clicked. The open window, the noises upstairs, and now this. But when I first came up to close the window, there hadn't been any water on the floor, which meant that if someone had come in through there, they were already inside the bathroom at the same time I was. Probably hiding in the bathtub while I was standing just a few feet away, closing the damn window. That realization terrified me in a way I still can't fully explain. It felt like I almost had a heart attack right there. My room was the first door in the hallway. Then at the far end was the bathroom, and next to it, my parents' room, right where the floor was wet. Very slowly, I stepped into my room and closed the door behind me. My parents had a strict rule, no locking bedroom doors, so they'd taken the key out. In that moment, I would have given anything to know where they kept it. I ran to my nightstand, grabbed my glucose meter, and checked how much insulin I needed. That's when I heard the floor creak again. I grabbed everything and hid inside my closet. Now, here's the thing about that closet. When my parents bought the house, my room was originally 2 separate rooms. They turned them into one, but there was a part of the wall they couldn't completely remove, so they built a closet around it. To make the most of the space, they added a hidden crawl space in the back that no one knew about. It was my favorite hiding spot when I played with my cousins. I kept hearing the creaking, clearer now. Like the footsteps were coming from my mom's office in the next room. It gave me just enough time to inject the insulin. Then I heard my bedroom door open. Someone had actually come in. By that point, I was already inside the crawl space, and the door was shut behind me. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. They walked through the room, circled the bed, peeked behind the curtains. They were definitely looking for me. Then, I heard footsteps coming toward the closet. I heard the door open. Felt the clothes being pushed to one side. I was sure they'd find me. But after a long silence, the footsteps moved away, and I heard them sit down on my bed. I had both hands over my mouth, trying not to make a single sound. And then, over the sound of the rain, I heard my parents' car pull into the driveway. The person got up, walked to the window, opened it. A few seconds later, I heard the front door open. My mom started calling my name. That's when I lost it. I broke down completely, crying like I'd never cried before. Like all the fear I'd bottled up suddenly tore its way out. I heard my parents calling louder, maybe already sensing something was wrong. But I couldn't answer, let alone move. I had no idea if that person was still in the house. What I remember after that comes in flashes. I remember my parents carrying me out of that crawl space, almost dragging me out. I remember trying to explain through pure panic what had happened. The police arriving. A really kind woman asking me questions I couldn't answer. I never saw the person's face. I didn't even know if it was a man or a woman. After everything that happened, I was never left alone again. The following week, my parents installed an alarm system. Later, we were told that a man had been arrested for breaking into another house and stealing valuables. They said it was probably him, but I knew it wasn't. The person who came into our house had the chance to steal something, and didn't take anything. Nothing ever happened again, and over time, I calmed down. But that night shattered my sense of safety in that house. I moved on, and I rarely think about it, except on the nights I go back to sleep in that room, and become that terrified 13-year-old kid all over again. Okay, so what I'm about to tell you is something that's still happening as I write this. And it's something that really unsettles me. Not just because it's happening in my own home, the one place that's supposed to be safe, but also because I genuinely can't explain it. No matter how hard I try to reason it out, no matter how much I rely on logic, every attempt ends in a dead end. That's why I'm turning to you. Not because I expect answers, but maybe just to feel like I'm not completely alone in this frustrating attempt to make sense of the absurd. The truth is, it all started about 5 years ago, when I decided to buy an old mansion deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It seemed perfect for what I was looking for. Steeped in history, full of old architecture. And although there were several details that weren't disclosed up front, including its exact location, which I legally can't reveal due to a confidentiality agreement I now, in hindsight, realize I should never have signed. I still believe that anyone from the area, or anyone who's seen some of the YouTube videos going around, probably knows exactly which house I'm talking about. Or at least the general area. The mansion isn't isolated. There are others like it in this region. Just for some context, so you don't think I'm completely insane for buying an old mansion out here. There was a very specific reason I wanted it. I'm a historian, and I've always been deeply fascinated by old houses. Not just their architecture or the way they withstand time, but because they tell stories. Stories about the people who lived in them, the families who came and went, and the secrets they buried in their rooms, their halls, and their attics. I've always believed a house can be a direct reflection of a family's social standing, its ambitions, and its eventual downfalls. Most of my research focuses exactly on that. The buried secrets of once powerful families. When I saw the mansion, or rather, this isolated manor, I didn't hesitate. The price was unbelievably low, and even though the place was in terrible condition for a structure over 200 years old, something about it pulled at me. It felt like the house was waiting for someone who understood it. And since I have no family and a stable financial life, I jumped at the opportunity without thinking too much. Today, just a few months after moving in, I see that as a huge mistake. Even though I bought it 5 years ago, I only moved in this year. The renovations were constantly delayed. Construction crews kept quitting. Some never returned after the first visit, and others walked off mid-project without much explanation, only saying the atmosphere was too heavy. While I tried to rationalize it, chalk it up to travel fatigue, or the overactive imagination of superstitious people, I started to realize there was something going on that I just couldn't ignore. For context, the property is surrounded by a vast forest, and because it's classified as protected land, no new construction is allowed there. That was said to be one of the main reasons the house was so cheap. But since my interest was strictly the mansion and its history, that didn't bother me at all. The first few months in the house were strangely quiet, not because there weren't any sounds, but because everything felt frozen, like time had stopped inside. Even the natural sounds of the forest kept their distance, like nature itself refused to come too close. And it was in that strange stillness that the little things began. Small events that, at first, I tried to dismiss as distraction or fatigue. The first time I noticed something really odd, actually unsettling, was when one of my kitchen knives went missing. Not just any knife, but one of the largest ones, the kind you don't just misplace. I found it days later, sitting on top of the bookshelf in my office, right next to an old letter opener I'd been using to examine historic documents. And although I found it strange, I blamed it on exhaustion. Long hours spent organizing archives and decoding old records. Maybe I'd grabbed the knife for opening packages. It wasn't that far-fetched. But then a pair of scissors disappeared from my nightstand and reappeared days later next to the upstairs bathroom sink, a bathroom I rarely ever use. That's when I really started to pay attention. I began noticing that whenever something went missing, it always turned up later. Always in parts of the house I didn't frequent. As if someone, or something, wanted me to know they were aware of my routines, more than I was comfortable admitting. I know it sounds bizarre and unsettling, but that's exactly how it felt. In fact, it's how I feel now, as I sit here writing this from inside the mansion. Like anyone in my position, I started sleeping poorly. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with the distinct sensation that someone else was in the house. But I never heard footsteps, never found open doors. And yet, paranoia began to creep in. That's when I started wondering if someone was somehow getting inside, trying to scare me into leaving. Maybe hoping I'd sell the house for even less than what I paid. As far-fetched as that idea sounds, it was the only explanation that seemed remotely rational. Things got worse one night while I was already in bed. Doors and windows all locked. Something I did religiously. That night, I heard 3 solid knocks on my bedroom door. There's no way to describe the terror I felt in that moment. If everything was locked from the inside, then who the hell was outside my door? My heart was racing as I lay there, frozen, not moving, like a kid too afraid to look under the bed. I only got up once the police arrived, after a panicked, trembling phone call. They searched the entire house, found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. I know they weren't trying to dismiss me, but I couldn't help feeling embarrassed, like a scared child needing attention. A few days later, feeling completely drained, I decided to go into town. I needed to pick up some basics: bread, rice, the usual. But more than anything, I needed to breathe, see people, get out of that house. I stopped by the usual grocery store and got into a casual chat with Mr. Charles, an older man who's been there forever and pretty much knows the entire history of the town. At one point, without thinking much, I mentioned I'd been living in the mansion up on the hill. As soon as I said it, he stopped arranging apples, froze, and looked at me with this strange expression. It wasn't fear like you see in movies, but it wasn't simple curiosity either. Like he'd heard this story before, too many times, and already knew how it ended. That's when he told me, quietly, like he didn't want the spirits to hear. He said that house has an old reputation, one that goes back generations, that everyone who's ever lived there, and there haven't been many, eventually disappeared. No trace, as if the earth swallowed them whole. Then the house would pass to their children, who did everything they could to get rid of it as fast as possible. And those brave or foolish enough to buy it next, they disappeared too. Same pattern. The strangest part, according to him, isn't the house itself. It's the forest around it. He explained that, according to the old folks, that patch of land never accepted the mansion's presence. It was like the house was built in a place that already had an owner. And knowing the history of these mountains, it did. What's truly frightening, he said, isn't ghosts inside the house. It's the ancient presences out there, among the trees. Beings that have always lived in the forest, that don't like intruders, that don't forget, and that wait for new occupants with a patience that doesn't belong to this world. I came back home with my head spinning. What Mr. Charles told me, it made sense. That's what disturbed me most, because everything I'd been feeling, the misplaced objects, the knocks at odd hours, the constant sense of being watched, fit that story too well. Like, for the first time, someone had put into words what I couldn't explain. And yet it clashed with everything I believe in. I've always been rational, grounded. I don't believe in spirits, curses, or hidden forces. And yet, there's something here I can't explain. Something I can't make fit into logic, no matter how hard I try. How do you deal with that? When what you feel confirms the impossible. I just sat there on the porch, staring at the tree line, not knowing whether what scared me more was what might be out there, or the fact that I no longer trusted my own understanding of reality. Now, as I write these lines, I know I can't stay here. I need to leave. But I also can't bring myself to sell this house to someone else without telling them what's going on. Because no matter how cheap it is, no price is worth the kind of dread that comes with living in a place where you don't know if you're alone. Where every creak could be more than just settling wood. And that's why I'm stuck, paralyzed. Because this house doesn't want to be abandoned, but it refuses to be lived in. And I'm here, trapped in the middle of that contradiction, afraid something might happen to me. This is the story of how I learned, the hard way, to respect the Appalachian Mountains and the stories folks have been telling about them for generations. I'm not saying I was disrespectful exactly. I think it was more like I was naive, mixed with a little immaturity. I met my wife in college, and when we finished school and decided to start planning a life together, we chose this part of the country instead of the city. Needless to say, when I moved out here, I was the walking stereotype of a city boy. I was used to having everything nearby, used to all the buzz and noise, used to going out whenever I felt like it, used to walking the dogs at night. You get the idea. My wife warned me that things were different out here, that the mountains were old, and that around these parts, people followed a certain code. Not out of superstition, but out of survival. I brushed it off, thinking she was exaggerating. And in my early 20s cluelessness, I broke a few rules. And I swear, one of those could have ended real bad. I moved out here when I was 22, 12 years ago now, and I've always been someone who liked late-night walks. I enjoyed walking or running, especially right before bed when the air was cooler. For weeks, my wife had been flat out forbidding me from going out after dark, saying she was too young to be a widow. I kinda thought she was joking, and since we were still new in town, I just went along with it. The night it all happened, an old childhood couple of hers had come over to celebrate the move, and we all stayed up late talking and drinking. My wife, who barely drinks, had a little more than usual that night and ended up heading to bed early, so I was left to clean up the kitchen. At first, I felt tired too. Figured I'd finish tidying up and crash. But somehow, by the end of it, I had this burst of energy and this weird excitement about finally living here. I even sat down on the couch for a bit to watch something, but I still had this buzz, this urge to get outside, stretch my legs, and check out the area at night. My wife was out cold, so I figured there was no harm in stepping out for a few minutes. I'd take a short walk, come back, and tell her about it the next day. Maybe she'd even start joining me. For some context, our place is in a little neighborhood, like a tiny village, completely surrounded by forest. To get to the main town, where the school and hospital and everything else is, you gotta drive. Walking from our house to the edge of the woods, where the houses stop, takes maybe 5 minutes. So that's where I headed. I didn't plan on actually going into the woods. I knew that was risky, especially for someone who didn't grow up around this kind of terrain. I just wanted to get close, maybe look around a bit. I didn't have a real plan. At night, the town felt weird, like a ghost town. There wasn't a soul outside, not even someone taking the trash out. All the windows had the blinds pulled down, and even the streetlights were few and far between. No dogs, no cats, nothing. It honestly felt like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where the main character stumbles into an abandoned town after some huge disaster. I started feeling a little less confident about stepping out, but I kept going. When I got to the edge of the woods, I noticed it was way quieter than I expected. The usual sounds of nighttime animals were either missing or super faint, at least compared to what I thought was normal. I told myself I'd just go in a few feet, maybe past a couple trees, then head back. That's when something happened. I don't know how. I swear, I've got no logical explanation. I had literally just stepped in, maybe 4 or 5 trees in, when I felt the air get colder. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured it could be chillier in the woods at night. But less than a minute later, what had been a cool breeze turned into this icy, freezing air. Like the temperature dropped 15 degrees all of a sudden. Is it possible for a microclimate like that to exist? I had no clue, but it seemed like the only thing that made any sense. It was summer, so I was out in just a t-shirt, and I figured I'd seen enough, and it was time to head back. That's when I realized I didn't know where I was. I was completely turned around. I could have sworn I'd only walked for a minute or two. I could have sworn that if I turned around, I'd see the road. But there was nothing but forest, just trees, everywhere. Then this fog started to rise, and that's when I really knew something was wrong. I started walking fast, almost jogging, I was convinced I'd walked pretty much in a straight line, so I couldn't figure out why I hadn't hit the road yet. The fog was getting thicker around me, making it harder to even see the trees nearby. I started to panic a little, not because of the forest or the fog, but because none of it made sense. There was no logical reason for me to still be out there, and the fog was getting so dense I could barely see ahead. I hadn't seen fog this thick in years. But it wasn't the fog that scared me the most. It was how impossible the whole thing felt. I kept walking, but at that point, I was seriously doubting my sense of direction. And that's when I noticed something that made me genuinely terrified. I started hearing footsteps. Not just random ones. They matched mine, perfectly. At first, I didn't even think they were footsteps, probably because they were too in sync with mine. I stopped, trying to listen, and looked around, but I couldn't see anything. And I didn't hear anything else either. Just silence. I started walking again, and the sound came back. I stopped again, and this time, I said, "Hello?" But the woods were dead quiet, not a single sound. Then, while I was scanning through the fog, out of the corner of my right eye, I thought I saw a shadow. I turned and looked straight at it, and whatever it wasn't moving, but it looked like the shape of a person. I didn't stick around to figure it out. I just took off running. I didn't care what direction anymore. I just wanted to get out of there, as fast as I could. The air felt heavy, and I started struggling to breathe normally, which was weird for me. I've always been active, in good shape, and like I said earlier, I was used to running. But the more I ran, the harder it got. Finally, I saw a light in the distance. I ran toward it until I hit the road and saw the houses. The relief was instant, but I still didn't stop. I kept running until I was inside our house with the door shut behind me. I don't know how long I stood there, back against the door, trying to catch my breath and calm my heart down. But it was a while. I stayed up the rest of the night, trying to make sense of what happened. The same questions kept bouncing around in my head. Was someone really out there with me? Or had I drunk more than I realized and freaked out over something totally normal? No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't come up with a good answer. And by morning, all I felt was a deep sense of embarrassment. I never told anyone what happened, not even my wife. I just felt too stupid. And in the 12 years since, I've never stepped foot into those woods at night again. I love living here now. And honestly, I feel more like a local than a city guy at this point. But sometimes, at night, even when I'm inside, I get this weird feeling. Like that cold air from that night is brushing against me again. It's probably all in my head. At least that's what I keep telling myself so I don't have to think about that night anymore.